Read a thesis statement.
Welcome back to this short video series about academic writing. Today we're going to talk about the third part of our triad or trilogy or trinity of academic writing, which is editing. Much like the Holy Ghost, it moves in mysterious ways, but it's an enormously effective and underlooked way of immediately improving your writing. Editing can make the difference between a good paper and a really excellent paper. Mediocre writers, they assume that writing is a one-step process, and when they're done, they're done. Now, one concept that I teach my students about regularly is the concept of diminishing returns. And what diminishing returns means is that output does not always match input at a certain point. For example, you have a donut factory that makes 100 donuts in 8 hours. If the factory is open 16 hours, it might make 200 donuts. That doesn't necessarily mean that if your factory is open 24 hours, you make 300 donuts. Because at a certain point, output starts to fall because of other problems such as supply or ingredients or labor. Studying and academic writing is much the same. And why I'm telling you this is that the first thing you should know about editing is don't do it on the same day as you write. I always say this, but if you forget everything I've told you in this episode, remember this: don't do your editing on the same day as you write. Your body needs to rest. Unless you're writing a very short piece of text like a paragraph, if you try to do the entire process in one day, it's not going to be efficient. The other reason that you don't want to do your editing on the same day as you do your writing is because of the peculiar way our brains work. When you write, you are thinking like a writer. If you immediately go from writing to editing, you're still approaching the essay that you wrote like a writer. You're not going to see it in the same way as you do when you're a reader. So that's one reason for going to bed, doing something else, coming back to the paper the next day fresh, when you will approach the paper as a reader, and you're going to see all sorts of things that you did not see before when you are thinking about the paper new and when it feels like you're reading it for the first time again. Now that we've defined when you edit, what we need to do is really divide editing into two aspects. The first one is obvious. You get up the next day, you go to your computer, you read your paper again. Much of editing is correcting. You find mistakes. You read it and you say, oh my gosh, I can't believe I wrote that. I didn't put a period here, I spelled this word wrong. Often it's a matter of pronoun reference or of support or evidence. You read your paper and you realize, well, wait a minute, that doesn't make sense. I haven't given reasons for that. So one of the obvious parts of editing is fixing mistakes. And then that's important. That's a valid part of editing, is fixing mistakes. But editing is more than that. The second part of editing is making the paper better. That's the overlooked secret sauce of editing, making your paper better. Improving things by moving around paragraphs, tightening up arguments, adding evidence. Sometimes it's a matter of throwing away sentences. The first thing that I want to talk about in terms of making your paper better through editing is less is more. If you can convey the same information in fewer sentences, fewer clauses, fewer pages, that is superior writing. It is more compact, it is more efficient. When I was an undergraduate and when I was a high school student, I remember the way I thought, and my students think the same way now when they're freshmen. The teacher has assigned me 3 pages. Oh my gosh, how can I write that much? The next paper is going to be 5 pages, that's forever. How can anybody write that much? I have to write a whole bunch of things to get to 5 pages. There's no way I'm taking things out. That would make my paper shorter. I can only promise you that when you become a more experienced writer, And when you start to write for real-world activities and purposes, sometimes you're going to be looking at writing from the other end, where you're going to have an editor or publisher or some person saying, look, maximum 1,000 words, maximum 1 page. Then you'll be telling yourself, oh my gosh, how can I make this fit within that limit? That's when editing is going to be more important for you in terms of reducing. Part of reducing is taking out dead sentences. You read something that you wrote and you realize this sentence just doesn't add anything. It's repeating the same point I made already. Throw it away. You write a sentence and you realize the second part of that sentence repeats the first. Throw it away. Or you have a sentence which does not seem related or relevant to your paper at all, and you wonder what you were thinking. Throw it away. What often happens is that there is redundant information at the beginning of sentences where people are trying to sound professional or sound lofty, and they end up wasting space, particularly with thesis statements. I believe that X equals Y. We can only conclude that X equals Y. Often that is totally redundant information. We know it's you who believes that X is Y. Your name is on the paper. Your dog didn't write it. This is one of the reasons that professors often tell you not to use I gratuitously in your paper, not because there's some kind of war against the individual, but because often the I is redundant. We know it's you. So instead of writing, I believe that it may be possibly assumed that children should not carry loaded weapons. Children should not carry loaded weapons. Says the same thing in fewer words. That's good editing. You've made this sentence shorter and you've conveyed exactly the same information. Clearer writing, shorter writing is good editing. I once had a professor who did not like is in papers. He always encouraged me to reduce my is's, whether they were forming passive constructions, the mouse is chased by the cat. Oftentimes you can get rid of those is statements. Obviously you can't really say the grass greens, but instead of saying the invention of flat screen televisions is a good thing, we could say the invention of flat screen digital televisions revolutionizes technology. Okay, you can convert that sort of noun statement to a verbal statement, and it's going to be a more interesting sentence, and it's typically going to be a shorter sentence. Removing excess is verbs can usually be done by eliminating passive constructions and by writing verbal statements. For example, instead of "the country is changing and this is unsettling for many people," write "the country's changes are unsettling for many people." It's shorter and punchier and has the same meaning. Now, the golden rule here is that you only remove the is if it makes the sentence shorter. As we said with grass is green, if we remove the is, we end up with something longer and pretentious. That's not good editing. Related to this technique is removing excess qualifiers. With phrases such as green in color, the field of medical science, the game of chess, readers already know that green is a color and that chess is a game. Unless these qualifiers have a specific function, throw them away. The same applies to doubled synonyms, which are often cliches. Each and every, the last and final, one and only, return again. Throw them away and your text will say the same thing in fewer words and will be less likely to bore your reader with clutter. In the last episode, we talked about using secondary sources. Let's examine in detail how phrasing these sources relates to editing. The conventional way to cite is to introduce the quote and follow it with an attribution. Experts observe that no one in the industry is to blame, or Dr. Green says that no one in the industry is to blame. We could turn this around by putting the name last. No one in the industry is to blame, according to Dr. Green, or put the name in the middle. No one in the industry, argues Green, is to blame. Notice that I've avoided using says over and over until the reader wants to vomit. These are all ways to put variety into your citation. Well, what are some ways to reduce space? One effective technique is a keyword quote, where we use only a few main words from the source. This gives the authority of a quotation while using less space. Sometimes in your paper you may need a block quote, which is a section of indented text 4 lines or longer. But use these sparingly. Often this information can be paraphrased or reduced into one sentence. Again, we want to build trust in the reader, and credibility is destroyed when the reader senses that you've shoveled in a long string of quotations to avoid writing anything. The point of external quotations is to support your arguments. Another way that we can improve the content of our writing through editing is by upgrading your diction, which is what one of my UNLV professors wrote about. What do we mean by upgrading your diction? Okay, well, not everyone's going to agree with my example, but there was a certain American president, no names, who was addicted to the word good. We met with the president of Germany. We had a good meeting. It was productive. We came to some good conclusions. The treaty is good. The war we are fighting is not good. Those are the sorts of sentences that elementary school children write or speak. And the problem with sentences that use good and good over and over again is that they are not precise and they are monotonous. So one trick or one tool or technique you might adopt in editing is upgrading diction. Try to find more precise, more accurate, more interesting words. We had an effective meeting with the German president. The treaty will be advantageous. The war has been terrible. Words like these are more precise and they convey more information. So there's no crime in using a thesaurus or one of those miniature dictionaries to upgrade your diction and to find better words. The only caution I'll give you is inflating your writing with verbose or pretentious vocabulary. Imagine Martin Luther King saying, "I possess a personal aspiration." That does not have anywhere near the same sort of force as "I have a dream." There's no crime in making the tone of your writing more professional and more interesting by using a more precise or sophisticated terminology. But don't overdo it by deliberately shoving in 8-syllable words. It may not make your writing more precise. It might just confuse people. The other thing that I should warn about is overdoing it by cutting the text in your paper. It's a good thing to throw out redundant sentences or shorten foolish or unnecessary clauses in sentences. What you don't want to do is end up writing a summary where you remove or you condense important information in your paper, ending up with a 3-sentence summary of what you've written before. You do want to make sure that you don't leave out important information or necessary facts or statements from your paper. When you're doing that, you're reducing what made the paper special or interesting to begin with. So to sum up this series, we've talked about planning, writing, and editing. And hopefully through all of these procedures, you've gained some techniques for making your writing more efficient, more clear, more interesting, and most importantly, believable. You've cultivated a trust in the reader that you know what you're talking about, and you're on your way to convincing the reader of your arguments. In all of these things, I'll say it again, there is part science and part art in writing. Throughout the writing procedure, you're going to find that you have familiar or favorite ways of phrasing things. You favor visual or oral or tactile or smell-related euphemisms or allegories or comparisons. That's fine. I think that it will be a boring world if you all write exactly the same way I do. And I think part of writing is developing an interesting style. I hope you've enjoyed this video series, and if you would like some written materials that go into more detail, you can go to my website and download them. Bye for now.